Hello, everyone. Today on Murder Ivy, I'm going to be discussing the tragic and disturbing case of Melissa Lucio. This has been a very widely publicized and polarizing case that sparked my interest because it's still ongoing and Melissa's innocence is still being put into question. Melissa was convicted of murdering her 2-year-old daughter, Mariah, and was sentenced to death and is currently the only Hispanic woman on death row in the state of Texas. First, I'm going to start off with some of her background information, and then I'll dive right into the case. Melissa Lucio is a Mexican-American woman who was born on July 18, 1968 in Lubbock, Texas, and experienced severe poverty growing up, as well as repeated sexual assault and domestic violence. She was sexually abused by family members beginning at the age of 6, and it started with 2 adult male relatives who brutally raped her when her mother was not home. According to Melissa's mother, she actually came forward and told her what happened, but she didn't believe her and quickly dismissed her and assumed she was lying. Unfortunately, this would be the beginning of a pattern of sexual abuse and assault that continued for several years and would follow Melissa into her adult life. At 16, she dropped out of high school and became a child bride in an attempt to escape her difficult situation, but it would prove to be futile. Melissa's first husband only perpetuated the cycle of abuse and trauma by frequently beating and berating her in bouts of alcohol-induced rage. Still a minor and unable to leave the abusive marriage, Melissa felt trapped and developed a drug habit to cope with feelings of depression and worthlessness, which was the start of her severe addiction to cocaine. Her husband later abandoned her and their 5 children when she was 26 years old. Melissa would go on to have 9 more children, including Mariah, with her next partner, Robert Alvarez, who was also abusive and repeatedly raped her and threatened to kill her on several different occasions. CPS was constantly being called on Melissa and Robert due to negligence and not being able to provide the basic needs for their children. The children were living in extreme poverty and were often homeless and had to rely on soup kitchens for their daily meals. In September 2004, CPS placed 7 of Melissa's children in foster care. Just over 2 years later, the children were returned to her care in November 2006. This would prove to be a fatal mistake. On February 15, 2007, Melissa's 2-year-old daughter, Mariah, fell down a crooked flight of stairs while the family was in the process of moving homes. Mariah had a mild physical disability that made her unstable while walking and prone to tripping. Mariah did not appear injured after the fall, but 2 days later, Melissa would put her down for a nap, and tragically, she would never wake up again. Mariah was taken to the hospital where she was declared dead almost immediately. During that same night, detectives were suspicious of Melissa due to all the bruises and bite marks on Mariah's body and decided to take her in for interrogation. The interrogation was more than 6 hours long, and the detectives were clearly using coercive tactics to force a confession out of Melissa. Keep in mind that Melissa was pregnant at the time and was forced to be there without being offered any food or water. I believe this was done on purpose to make her feel desperate and uncomfortable so that she could confess to get out of there as soon as possible. After hours of being asked the same questions and being pressured into confessing, Melissa finally admitted that she would occasionally hit Mariah and bite her. During the interrogation, the detectives handed Melissa a doll to demonstrate how she would spank Mariah. That taped demonstration and confession would seal the deal for Melissa and implicate her in Mariah's death.
Both.
How would you do it when you're sitting down? Show me how you would do it. The way you actually did it. Just get it over with.
Oh, just make her real hard on her back.
Well, do it real hard like you would do it.
Just make her hard.
Like the way you would do it.
That's the way we do it. I mean, I wouldn't pound on her.
But, well, do it.
You done.
Was it harder?
No.
Because I'm doing it hard.
Well, you're doing it on yourself. I mean, I wasn't pounding on her or anything.
Show me exactly how you would do it like that.
Yes.
Okay. And this is just what? Spanking?
I definitely believe that the approach that the detectives used was unethical. However, it makes sense that Melissa would be a prime suspect in Mariah's death, considering the several bruises, bite marks, and bald spots on her head, where hair appears to have been forcefully pulled out. It's absolutely horrifying, and it looks like child abuse from a mile away. Out of respect for Mariah, I'm not going to include any pictures of her injuries because they're extremely graphic and disturbing. Once the interrogation concluded, Melissa was immediately arrested and charged with capital murder. During Melissa's trial, there were many inconsistencies from the prosecution and a significant amount of false evidence presented to the jury. For example, one of the medical examiners testified that the bruises and injuries on Mariah's body resulted from abuse. However, pathologists who have reviewed the evidence concluded that this testimony was false. Mariah's autopsy showed signs of blood coagulation disorder, which causes profuse bruising throughout the body. At the time of her death, Mariah was healing from an injury to her arm, which the medical examiner also said was a sign of abuse. However, a pediatric surgeon who reviewed the evidence concluded that the medical examiner's testimony was misleading and that there was nothing about Mariah's fracture that indicated that it was the result of any abuse. According to several of Melissa's family members, Mariah was not a violent person, and CPS reports do corroborate this because all the reports made were due to negligence and not physical abuse. There is significant evidence that supports the claim that Melissa received an unfair trial. Cameron County District Attorney Armando Villalobos was the prosecutor in Melissa's case, and it is believed that his sole motive in convicting Melissa was because he was seeking re-election at the time. It's important to note that Villalobos was convicted of bribery and extortion later on in 2014 and is currently serving a 13-year federal prison sentence. The judge at Lucio's trial didn't allow a psychologist to testify about her history of sexual abuse as a child or domestic violence as an adult. There's also some evidence to support that Melissa's defense attorney provided a weak defense for her case because he joined the district attorney's office right after the trial concluded. In the end, Melissa lost her trial and was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Melissa has many supporters, including some of her own children, who adamantly deny that she abused Mariah and are fighting to appeal her conviction. A recent documentary in support of Melissa recently came out to prove that she's innocent and a victim of a corrupt criminal justice system. There is even bipartisan support for Melissa among politicians in Texas who have spoken out against her sentence and were in support of halting her execution. It is also believed that many of the injuries that Mariah sustained before her death were due to sibling abuse. Melissa claims that one of her daughters, Alexandra, was physically abusive to Mariah due to resentment and hatred that she felt because they didn't share the same biological father. Melissa states that she took the blame for Mariah's bruises to protect Alexandra, which is interesting because even if that's true, then she is still responsible for Mariah's pain and suffering because she allowed one of her older children to relentlessly abuse her and did nothing about it. Even one of her own daughters, Selena, has spoken out against her and confirmed that Melissa singled Mariah out and abused her, and she says this in the following clip.
So last night I couldn't really sleep aside from the thunderstorms that we were having. But I was really confused about what I want to say about the whole scenario. One thing for sure that I want noted is that my brother and I were both interviewed for the documentary, but because we let Sabrina know that my mom was very abusive towards my sister, that wasn't included in the documentary, mine and my brother's interview. My brother was in the documentary from what I've seen, but his interview wasn't included at all. He was just sitting next to my sister. Another thing is Sabrina keeps in every interview reiterating that none of the children in the home, I guess, told her that Mariah was being abused, but I have evidence.
We can't know for sure if Selena's telling the truth, but her claims should be taken seriously because she was in Melissa's custody during the same time as her sister Mariah and was a witness to a lot of the abuse that occurred during that time. Clearly, no one was there to protect Melissa throughout her entire life, and unfortunately, she continued that vicious cycle of abuse by not protecting her own children. One way or another, Melissa did abuse her children because neglect is a form of abuse. It may have not been physical, and it's very possible that she isn't responsible for the death of Mariah. But based on the facts, abuse of some form did occur, and I believe that's important to keep in mind. Melissa still needs to be held accountable and isn't completely absolved from the responsibility, even if she's found not guilty of capital murder. Our society tends to look at cases like this in a very black and white manner. She's either completely innocent or a cold-blooded killer. There is no in-between. Celebrities like Kim Kardashian have come out to support Melissa without knowing all the facts and automatically assume that she is completely innocent and just a victim of circumstance, which is very irresponsible and negates from the reality of the situation. When reviewing all the available information, this case definitely falls in that gray area. She's not completely absolved of committing crimes against her children, but she's also not this horrible monster that the prosecutors and detectives have tried to make her out to be. So that concludes this episode of Murder Ivy. What are your thoughts on this case? Sound off below. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe and hit the like button. I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.